over the course of a life, you have to go through many suicides, but not a suicide of the body. Um, and this is a video talking to this meaning that I'm appropriating of the word suicide, because the ego is that part of our mind that thinks life is futile, that people are mean, that you have to win or lose in life. And what I mean by going through a suicide is that you die to being a child, you die to being an infant, you die to being an adolescent, you die to one career, to one relationship. There's these constant deaths. In every few days your skin is dying, ever replacing. You know, there's this motif of the snake shedding its skin. You know, a woman has a period, there's a death if it doesn't get fertilized of a potential life there. So in the biological realm, in the psychological realm, in the realm of different stages of maturity, there are constant suicides. They are unconscious, they just happen, some of them. But then sometimes you have to say, well, this woman's no longer interested in me, and die to that relationship. Or you have to say, I'm no longer interested in this man, or I'm no longer interested in this woman. And there's sort of a death to that journey that you're on. Now, you don't die, and your body doesn't die, but the dynamics of what once was, which wasn't before at a certain point, that falls away. And so, in a sense, spiritual wisdom is about mastering these non-body suicides, right? And the ultimate spiritual wisdom is the conscious killing of the fearful aspects of the mind. I mean, you actually have to cut it out, like a surgeon cuts it out, and it's like it's a psychic surgery that goes. It usually takes a long time. But the thing that you associate, that the pain that you associate with the stories of difficult experiences in your life, the sorrow that you're embedded in, the depression that you're embedded in, ultimately it's a gift. Now that sounds really horrible, right, to say that, because anyone in a deep depression say, oh, your depression's a gift. You're like, yeah, thank you, screw you, kind of thing. And that's a perfectly natural response. But the gift lies in recognizing that something I'm doing, some way in which I'm looking, is sabotaging my happiness. And you can say, well, he did it to me, she did it to me, blah, blah, blah. But yes, they did terrible things, or you made a terrible mistake, or whatever the reason for your upset is. I can't deny that, and no fool would. But then, no wise person would. Every fool would, sorry. But then, what I'm talking about is like, it is into the depths of our pain, our sorrow, and depression. It is in the soil of those experiences that we dig down deep, and some skin is shed, right, in the process. If we are constantly stuck, 50 years, 60 years, constantly stuck in our depression, then the soil of our flowering has become a prison, right? And so the depression has ruled the mind, the grief has ruled the mind. And the really true purpose of all depression, all conscious suicide without the suicide of the body, is to unleash a different thought system, a different spaciousness, a different quietude. And so the way of grace is the way of this capacity to look at what mechanism in the mind is manufacturing the sadness, the irritation, the upset. And to recognize that you have control over that mechanism. Yes, immense injustice is true in the world. I'm not arguing that's not what I'm talking about. That goes on, right? That is the way of egos, that is the way of insecurity, that is the way of a lack of virtue and a lack of integrity and ignorance and insecurity. And often people are not even aware, they're just conditioned, they can't even see their conditioning. So, if you judge that, you become a victim of your projections of fear. But if you see it, right, if you see the injustice and you don't trap yourself in this depressed reaction, then there's been a suicide. Because the depressed reaction is there. You wouldn't be watching this video unless you'd had experience of it. And you can't be in the body really without that depressed reaction happening at some point or other in your life. Someone steals something from you. Like, you just watch like this sinking feeling, this, like someone cheats on you in your relationship, right? You just see this knot that comes up in the stomach, and like the noise of the mind saying this person's evil or he's a narcissist or whatever, and you sort of clinically appropriate whatever dark thoughts and analysis you can to this character in your story, and it runs your mind. Until you look at it and you take sort of refuge, not as a temporary activity, but as a annihilation of what you once were, right? Because you can't solve depression. You can only sort of treat the symptoms of depression with medicine. Food can definitely change. Like, the food that you eat every day is fundamental. So that, if you eat maltodextrin and all these crap sugars and stuff, there's a good chance that your brain is just going to be sick and addled, and your body's going to be unhealthy. And that kind of relative, consumption of what we consume does impact the physiology and the psychobiology of the story. But I'm not talking so much at that level. I'm talking at the level of there's a master deceiver in your mind, and we'll call it the ego or the self-concept. And he has one job, and that is to be a chameleon. And the chameleon can change colors, it can change patterns of colors, it can have all these different masks using these different colors and patterns of colors over this realm in the psyche called the self-concept or the ego. And it doesn't care what mask it's wearing as long as it's trapped you. And it sounds like it's an agenda of this foreign creature, but it's actually the agenda of an illusion which you've subscribed to. And just like you subscribe to a mailing list, you can just unclick. And that's what I mean by the suicides that you go on through a life. You can say, oh, I'm 50, I'm getting old, I'm depressed, it's my birthday. And then there's this capacity to say, but I'm not a human doing. I'm not like, you've done something to get to 50, right? You've had to live, that's an action for 50 years, and you can sort of associate depression with that ascendancy, that achievement. But that entity, when it's attached to your outside circumstances, you have to kill it, while not undermining the pragmatism of handling the world and your needs in it, or the needs of the body. But the ultimately healthy suicide is not of the body, it's of the insecure mind that drives the self-concept. And that takes the highest form of intelligence is observation, and from observation you can see the false self. And this clarity ends pettiness, ends anger, ends retribution, ends insecurity, all the features that come from insecurity, greed, destitution, sense of destitution, sense of not being worthy of love. That's spiritual maturity right there. It's a suicide several suicides over the course of a life to an identity. You know, there was a famous sportsman, and I can't remember, I just read this once, but he was told by his doctor that, like, you know, if he kept playing the sport and something happened in a certain way, his arm would be knocked out and he'd never be able to play again. And by the sounds of things, he was quite an aware person, because it happened. And he didn't think, oh man, my livelihood's gone. He didn't dwell on all the problems and all his like self-pity. He just said, right, what's next? There was no victimhood in it. Like, he knew what had happened was the end of one story and the beginning of another. And so at the level of psychology, he was a master of psychological suicide, in the way that gets you out of the pain mechanism, right? He was like, I am not my pain mechanism. I'm not the victim of the world I see. And there was no kind of like, in the way I read the story, and I may be wrong because he could have been, you know, we don't know what went on in his head, but you can use it as a metaphor. The way I read the story, you know, there was no self-centered entity in him that took that experience as a problem, right? If someone attacks you and so forth, then go to the police, take them to court, do whatever it takes, right? But if you just realize that that's like maturity and managing self-boundaries in a healthy way, and not being a victim of, you know, using the system to support practical steps to abuse, that's fine. But at the same time, spiritual mastery, psychological wisdom, is you've died to the idea that you're a victim of whatever story that you have been a victim of in the world. And I don't mean that you're not therefore a victim of that story. You are, right? At a relative level, you are. But the association from that experience that you draw and ping or impinge upon your identity, that you kill. And people can say, well, how'd you do it? How'd you do it? You're full of shit. You're making my very painful situation, you're making a mockery of it. And then you say, no, you are. You're mocking your power. You're mocking your capacity to rise, right? And you, not everyone's ready to hear this. If someone had said this to me a few weeks ago, like, I would have slapped them. You know, I wouldn't have slapped them, but I'm speaking inwardly. I'd think, well, you don't know what pain I'm in. Screw you, right? And that's a perfectly valid response. But I'm not talking about whether what I'm saying is true at a relative level, to whether it's compassionate to say it to someone at a certain point of their story. This is a YouTube video. It's not directed to anyone other than those that are drawn to it for whatever reason, right? And they can't say to him, well, screw Nathan, he's full of shit. Like, he's telling me something which I can't achieve. And that's maybe how you feel if you hear it, and that's how you hear it, right? But if you want to be happy, you really can't argue with it. You can argue with it, but you won't. It's like arguing with a wall. You know, what's being said here? It's true. Right? You can't argue with the truth. You can't say, well, I don't like the fact that the body dies. You know, you can't go to some complaints department and say, well, you know, whoever designed this body malarkey, like, I want my money back. I want to live forever. You can't argue with something like that. And if you do, it's just defeatist to your own best interests. So, you know, suicide has got this dark connotation to it, and there's a lot of, you know, reason to empathize with people who are very depressed. You know, they're in a lot of pain, and to condemn them or judge them is hardly loving. But if you're confronting, if you're pulling out this courage. Love confronts, it doesn't evade. Love takes balls, it takes courage, right? You see young women with babies, they're single mothers. They have so much strength, right? Because there's something bigger than them. They've contacted something in them which is like, I have to protect this helpless child. Well, if you're contemplating suicide, there's a part of you that's like that. It needs that inner power of that mother in you to gently nurture and raise this character that is not seeing itself as a victim of circumstances or the externals, that is really listening to peace and quietude and love, and being in that listening caught in the reflection of the mirror of that wisdom. Like, I am the mother that nurtures myself. I am the love that I seek. I am the babe that needs that love. And then you become like this holographic, this awareness of this holographic perception of what matters in your relationship with yourself and in your interpersonal relationships. It starts to really become vital, and you're not reacting, or you're not judging, but you're not a doormat for others to walk on either.